So good evening, everybody, and welcome to those on the live stream. My name's Thorold. I'm the editor for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at the Wall Street Journal. And I'm delighted to have with me today Kristo, who is the co-founder of TrasferWise, one of London's great success stories in fintech, here to talk to us tonight about how he got to where he has, some of his learnings, and how he sees fintech today. But I just want to start off, Kristo, with you arrived in London from Estonia and you had a problem, which was having to transfer money, I think in your case, from here back to Estonia to pay student loans, is that right? Or something of that nature. And Tarvet was the other way around, transferring money from Estonia to here, and you both were paying these large fees. And so you had a particular problem you wanted to solve. Obviously today you are running a company valued at, I think, 1.1 billion, is that correct? Can we confirm that today? No, maybe not. Whatever. Roughly over $1 billion. It is a unicorn. And I'd just love you to start off by giving us this sense. There's a lot of entrepreneurs in this room and a lot of people who aspire to be entrepreneurs. You know, how did you go from the idea to where you are today? Just tell us the story and some of the learnings you had along the way.
Thanks everyone for having us here. You're absolutely right. So the story of TransferWise started about 10 years ago. I had an unusual problem. For the first time in my life, I had too much money. I had moved to London for work, and the salaries here were like probably 8 times as much as I used to earn back in Estonia. I was working for banks as a management consultant. And you're right, so I had this issue of sending money back to Estonia to pay for my mortgage back there. And I went to HSBC, typed in my Estonian account number, and sent £10,000 over Christmas after the bonuses came in. And I noticed about £500 goes missing. And then I started looking like, what's going on? I called my Estonian bank and HSBC, and no one really knew what was happening. They did the right thing. And then I realized I had just been incredibly stupid. Of course, the bank had used a different exchange rate to what I was expecting, looking at Google or xe.com or Yahoo.
So were you still at that point those people who go to the airport and see no commission and think you're getting it for free? Is that
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. That's quite embarrassing, right? So I was working for banks myself, like consulting them, and I was kind of pulled the rug under. So of course I couldn't do anything about it. I was quite frustrated that this happened, disappointed in myself that I figured it out after the fact. But then I was looking for a solution, and I was looking for other Estonian folks who might have the same problem. So my friend Tarvet then was living in London but working for Skype and getting paid in euros. So he had all of his euros to bring over to London. So we started doing exactly what you said. I put my pounds onto Tarvet's account in London. We looked at the real exchange rate, the Reuters exchange rate, and then he put the equivalent amount of euros onto my account. So basically, this solved our problem. This was TransferWise for Kristo and Tarvet. And then time went on in the next couple of years. We both saved quite a bit of money, and then we brought other friends into the scheme who either needed to move pounds to the UK or euros back to Estonia. And then it was in 2010, thereabouts, where I started thinking that also having consulted banks for about 4 or 5 years then, I realized that actually they're not really getting any better. So it's maybe easier to solve this problem by just solving it in parallel with the banks. And
how did you go about that? I mean, the idea is simple but great, because I've lived in the US for a long time, so I had the same issue as you, always thinking, what happened to 4% of my money when I did that, or whatever it is. So how did you take that very smart idea and transfer it into what it is today? I mean, just give us a sense of how you went about it from a financing perspective in terms of just building that initial base of customers, etc. Can you just tell people who are in that position today?
Sure. I mean, just to make you all feel better, from the outside everything looks pretty glossy, right? But on the inside, especially in the first couple of years, it's just kind of hard work and building the stuff. But the way that it worked was literally building up the first website and getting the licenses to be able to operate, it's quite interesting. At the time, there weren't many startups trying to do financial services, and there was no kind of experience of going through and getting regulated from ground zero. So we did that in 2010, and then in early 2011, we just launched launched a website, and there was a TechCrunch article which said there's these two Estonian dudes who built this website. You can transfer money across borders very well, and it's cheap and it's very clever. So after that blog post came live, we had about 15 minutes later, we had someone send us £2,000 to send it to France, and then a bit later there was someone €1,000 to come to London, and by the end of the day we had a book of transactions. So we had nothing else. We had a license, we had a website, we had a TechCrunch article,
and that was the beginning. And how did you kick it off originally? Did you self-finance this? Did you have investors from the word go? How did you approach it?
We completely self-financed it, and what there was mostly our work and a little bit of expenses. There wasn't a lot of capital needed even to get this thing going. And actually, we didn't fundraise for the first year, so we only fundraised in early 2012 for the first time. So this thing, as I said, at the end of the first day, I was going home and thought, yikes, I have 200 emails in my mailbox. So I called up a friend. I went through my phone book, literally, to call up a friend and see who could I hire as my first employee. So Eva is still with us. It's now 6 years later. And she those payments happen, so it was super manual at the time.
And you were fulfilling those yourself. You weren't, obviously the business you have is trying to match people who want to move dollars to pounds and pounds to dollars or the equivalent. Those early transactions, there wasn't that community to do that. Were you then doing those transactions yourself? How were you?
So there was this actually worked this way. So we had a pound account and a euro account. We collected euros on the euro account, pounds on a pound account. And we did match the transactions. The way it worked is you just had to wait a little bit longer for enough money to accumulate if you're doing a larger transaction. So there was a kind of a convenience issue that it just took a little bit longer. So now that the volumes have come to where they are, and we've gotten clever of how can we source liquidity, now the payments from Pounty to fulfill.
And so you started with the article, you got some people in the door. Since then you've got a bit more sophisticated. You've done a lot of largely naked advertising to show how transparent you are, quite old school, and billboards and things like that. What has been the most important thing? Is it word of mouth? Is it that brand building you've done through advertising? What's the thing that's worked best for you?
That is a very good question, and it took us probably a couple of years to figure this out properly. To be honest, the minute the article went out in TechCrunch, we started transactions were coming in, so we did not do any marketing, and there was suddenly more and more transactions every day. So I should have seen it back then, that there's this kind of viral nature in what we're doing. But it became really evident maybe a year later when Alicante, as a city in Spain, just spring up on the map. And I was doing customer service then as well, occasionally, and talking to people. And then I pieced it together that there was this one dude, one elderly pensioner, British dude in Alicante, who had basically gone out and invited everyone else in Alicante to use TransferWise. So experiences like that just started to demonstrate that you could advertise as much as you want, and the next time I see a bank advert, I've programmed my brain not to see this. Yep. But if your friend tells you that you're being an idiot if you're paying HSBC the fees you are, then that's something that I do listen to and I do care. So at the moment, about 65-70% our customers come from on a recommendation, either word of mouth, or we have an invite program where we kind of share the marketing spend that we don't do with our customers who invite their friends.
From where you started to where you are today, has where you've got to been where you expected? Has the journey been broadly as you anticipated when you guys set off, or has it been a completely roundabout journey to get where you have? Just give us a sense of what's worked, what hasn't, and how you've adapted along the way.
So I left my job when I started this, and about a year later, one of my good colleagues came to me and asked, so you're still doing TrasferWise? Is it not ready yet? Right. So there's definitely, especially back in the time, especially with engineers, it was a feeling like, okay, you build a system and then it's done. You can put it out there. Okay, maybe you need a couple of sysadmins, maybe a couple of operators, a couple of people to run it. But it could be, a pretty massive thing, only with a few people. We're now more than 600 people in 10 locations. We're 42 different nationalities. So a few things that we learned. It's definitely not worth skimping on customer service. When people want to call you, just better pick up the phone. It's just the easiest thing to do, and it's certainly worth it. And I've realized that over the course of time, you do have to be local in places, not too early. We have the first bigger office we launched was in the US, in New York. We now have another one in Tampa, which is about 50 people. We have about 15 in New York. We launched in Budapest. We have people on the ground in Tokyo, in Singapore. You just have to be close to the customers.
And the banks, you're obviously taking a pretty juicy part of their business. It's not massive, but it's very profitable for them to move this money with the spreads we're talking about. To what extent are the banks competitors to you, and to what extent are they actually facilitating what you're doing and actually just a vital part of your whole business? Can you just give a sense of how that relationship works? Because in public you are not that complimentary about the banks. Obviously your advertising and stuff is sort of pointing out that this isn't very transparent, that they are charging a lot of money for this, but at the same time you kind of rely on them to be able to do what you do. So just give a sense of how that relationship works.
That's a very good question, and those two things aren't conflicting. I totally despise the fact when people are intransparent about what they charge, and I'm just sad when I see our customers at this first moment when they figure out that they've been paying those hidden fees. That first moment is just so frustrating to watch sometimes. But of course, banks are infrastructure, so our money is in banks. There's nothing we can do about it. There's nowhere else to put it. I would put it to Bank of England. They don't want it.
Bitcoin? We'll get on to that.
So banks are infrastructure, and of course, we rely on the financial infrastructure to work, and we work with banks. There are some interesting developments. So it so happened, we found out about a year ago that there's a bank in Hungary, a small bank in Hungary, of all places, where our customer started and said, my bank told me about TransferWise. That's very interesting. So we figured out there's this small bank in Hungary. I figured out it's better for their customers, better for their experience to recommend them to use TransferWise than to offer this international payment service themselves, because you need to know how account numbers work in Mexico. You need to know how they work in Tokyo. Money gets stuck somewhere. You need to figure this out. And it's quite expensive for banks. So this small bank, they start sending their customers to us. Then since then, we've actually implemented a couple of integrations where you can link your bank account with TransferWise. It only works in two banks at the moment, one in Germany, number 26, and one in Estonia. And then you can use TransferWise from within your banking app. It just makes the banks have figured out that actually we can make it if they're already doing it.
And they just take a share of the profit, or they just use it as a better service and thank you for it? Well, how does that work?
Actually, they see the biggest value in taking their cost away and offering their customers a better service. But of course, that doesn't work with HSBC yet, and I'm not convinced that this is a very scalable model yet.
And why have they not reacted more in terms of, I mean, obviously, you know, they could turn around and just cut their fees or cut their spreads and you'd be in trouble. I mean, has that happened at all, or have they just let you get on with it because they make so much money and you're still relatively small? And when does that change? When do you get big enough to really threaten them?
So I'm an HSBC customer. I don't use them that much, but I still have an account there. So I got a paper for, actually that was like a stack of papers, like 10 papers, came through the mail about a year ago, saying they've dropped their international payment fees from £15 to 4, or something like this. Maybe £12 to 4. Right. So big success. They're dropping their transfer fees, and that's great. You know, I love it. I mean, that's the reason why we started this business, for banks to drop. But of course, if you then start looking at how their spreads have moved, spreads are actually going up a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's not nice. That's not nice. And it would be quite funny. So how would the banks come out? So how would HSBC come out and say, "Dear customers, we have now realized that it was wrong to charge hidden fees, this 4.5%. So we're now going to charge 1.5% of hidden fees." You can't do that because it's a bit too much of a reveal.
Got you. So the business got some traction, you got some success. Talk us through, because I'm sure this is something that a lot of people will be thinking about if they're starting up businesses. You got to the point where you needed to raise money, you needed to scale it, and you needed to bring in outside investors. Can you just give us a sense of sort of how you went about that, any sort of anecdotes from your initial meetings, how you got people interested, and just a sense of, you know, what you learned in that process that is useful for people?
Very happy to share, just with one caveat. I did this 5 years ago now. I'm sure the world has changed, world has moved on. Sure. So take this with a pinch of salt. There are a couple of observations, though, or experiences. When we started, we were live for a year. We had members before we started even talking to investors, and that's probably one of the luckiest things that ever happened to us. Because we weren't distracted for the first year. We knew that we actually don't need that money too much, and we self-funded something. I had a bit of money, Thorold had a bit of money. We didn't need to distract ourselves with fundraising. We didn't design the product to be able to fundraise. We designed the product to be useful for solving the problem. So that was, in retrospect, definitely very, very smart that we didn't raise too early. And of course, when we did raise, it was a waste of, not a waste, but a sink in time. We tried to raise in London. We were based in London. These conversations went back and forth and back, and it's getting, it's quite a lot of time spent there. And then we met this guy, Roger Ehrenberg, of IA Ventures. Yeah. He's based in New York. And it was literally one trip out to New York, one lunch with his partners, a little bit getting to know each other, and we had a deal for the first fundraising, which is about $1.3 million, I think. Yeah.
And how much of that was because you guys got on, and what was the reason for you choosing him and him choosing you, or was it just meant to be? How does that work?
So us choosing them,
you didn't have a choice.
He knows that. We just didn't have a choice, really. Okay. At the time, we had a choice not to fundraise, but that would have been quite hard. For him to choose us, I think there was an element at this stage. The team and what the team says and how they say it is quite important. So he was an ex-trader. So he kind of understands how the banks work and what's broken there. So he understood that there's something to be done, like the team. I think that was the thing. And I guess the learning for me is if the investment's not happening in the first or second click, then just move on. It's not worth spending iterations and iterations and iterations on fundraising.
So since then, the financing scene in fintech in London has obviously moved on, as you say, quite a lot. one of the things that has changed, obviously, is the vote on the 31st of June. Do you have any sense yourself of how that might have affected financing here? And you obviously talk to people in the industry. Can you just give a sense to people here who are now going out in a pretty different environment, both from a fundraising perspective and an attracting talent perspective, whether you see any significant change yet? Is it too early to say? Just your sort of perspective a couple of months after the vote.
So I think there are two slightly separate questions, and they're dependent on each
Yep.
other. Is London the place to build a product or build a startup? And that, like, financing, just part of the story. I think another big part of the story is talent.
Yep.
Do people still want to come to London? You know, looks like it. I'm not sure how much is it going to last, but that's probably the most important thing, is how many people come here and how easy it is to do business here and how easy it is to build products that would scale to Europe.
And has there been any sign of people being less willing to come from abroad? Are people thinking?
There are cases, but it's hard to know if it's anecdotal. I think, like, after the vote, just so many people were so disappointed, and maybe the decisions or things that they said were slightly more emotional than they need to be. I mean, it was a terrible decision, but
We won't go into that.
I don't know if it's worth. I don't know if it's worth kind of drawing conclusions yet. What's gonna happen?
But you guys aren't planning any changes to the way you've structured your business or where your staff are based or anything like that?
No. And as I said, the two things that might change that is if we actually lose access to the European market, then of course we need to open up a base somewhere in the Eurozone or in the EEA. And second is talent. When we see that it's suddenly much harder to get people coming here than to our Budapest office, then of course we are to our Budapest office or to Tallinn.
So I'm not checking my email here, but I'm just on Slido, so please do vote on questions or add questions. But one is a Brexit-related question, actually, which has a lot of interest, which is, how did you deal with the amazing fluctuations on that day? Obviously, the pound, I think I remember because I got a call at about midnight from my staff saying, it looks like this is happening. And the pound literally fell off a cliff in Japan or whatever it was trading at that point, and is still down 12%. But it was obviously a massive moment. How did that affect your business? How did you deal with that?
I'm actually very proud of how we dealt with that as a team. And just to explain why, I went to bed that night, the night before, and I slept, and I woke up, and trouble had happened. I actually had nothing to do that night. What we did, we knew that there was going to be a fluctuation, so about a week before, we sent an email to all of our customers who had made payments either from pound or to pound, to GBP, and we just reminded them that this thing is going to happen. It can go one or two ways. You might lose a lot of money, or you might gain a bit of money. So what we asked our customers to consider was, if they want to make a payment in the next week, they better do it now rather than wait when the fish has gone bad. And that was...
Did you see a surge of people doing that ahead of time?
Massive. And what was really interesting, we were... because we decided that when this happens, when the volatility happens, we have to shut down the system. We can't take transfers because there's no counterparty. So we're actually feeling quite bad about this, that there's going to be no service during the night hours. And when we sent out this email, we got super positive response. People were, there's so many people who got the reaction, oh crap, this is not actually happening. I need to think about my money as well. And a lot of people were grateful because they managed to do it before the event happened.
Before the correction, that's interesting. Another question, interesting, which we haven't really touched on yet, but on regulation and just how difficult it is to get started in this highly regulated environment in fintech, and obviously banking is ever more regulated.
So at the time, I think that's also changed now. And fintech is such a big word now. When we started, doing anything in financial services with a tech background. There was PayPal, and then there was 10 years of nothing. And I think everyone had a mentality, the founders had the mentality that anything to do with regulation has to be delayed, or you shouldn't kind of spend your time on regulation, and then once you're big enough, you have to, then you'll deal with it. We took a totally opposite approach, and actually, to be fair, I think regulation is good. So if you think what it is, it's just governments trying to protect the people. And then all you need to do is you need to prove to the government that you're doing the right thing.
But you've had issues within the US, for example, around some of the licenses and stuff like that. I mean, is it just highly complicated when you're trying to scale this thing very, very quickly, go to 42 countries, as you've said, you've got all of these currency pairs going on, all of these licenses, the US is incredibly complicated, as we know. I mean, does this just eat up huge amounts of your time and energy, or actually is it something that can be done in a relatively straightforward way?
So certainly it could be easier, and the US is a great example. So whenever I have a chance to speak to the European Commission or the governments in Europe, it's a great opportunity to congratulate them. They managed to do this single currency zone. They managed to do common regulations in financial services across all of Europe. Whereas if you go to the US, you need a license in Nebraska, in Alabama, every little state, and every little state comes in and does an examination of your processes every year. So if there's 50 states, there's 52 weeks, pretty much have someone come in and examine you, pretty much doing almost the same thing. It's all right, but it's not efficient, definitely.
So just sort of looking forward from here, and it's growing fast and you're taking it international, is that a sort of long-term business in itself, or do you need to broaden that out and use it to add new products? Where does it go from here?
So we always start this discussion from what is the problem that we're solving.
Okay.
Today, the problem is the problem is that we save people about £1 million every day.
How's that a problem?
And about £200 million is paid in hidden fees on currency exchange to the banks.
Okay.
So it's only 1 million per day that we save.
So you've got a lot more to do.
We've got lots more to do there. So that's kind of an immediate problem that we almost know how to solve. We don't quite know yet how to solve it in every country, but we're on it. And now the next question you asked me earlier, what are the big problems in financial services? And there are many. It's just getting super tricky when you start thinking about it. One of the kind of the underlying causes, I believe, is that financial services or banking generally, there's very little competition. I don't know how many of you work in banks. How many people work in banks? Or a few. Do you guys feel competitive with competition from other banks? Is it like you're worried about this? No, you're not worried about this. Of course, you're not worried about this. There's no competition. So a lot of that starts from there, and at the same time, there's this huge inertia that, as we talked before, our money has to live somewhere, and it lives in bank accounts. So there's a huge inertia that I can't be bothered. I have moved from HSBC to Metro, but even that wasn't easy, and I'm still kind of using a little bit of HSBC now and then. So a lot of those problems when it comes to the cost of card payments or the cost of borrowing even is coming from the fact that there's very little competition in banking. It's coming from the fact that there's huge inertia because your money has to live in a bank.
Sure.
And finally, it comes from cross-subsidization, because there's no usually the way the dynamics work is that when you have a lot of competition, then the ones who don't cross-subsidize win, and competition counteracts subsidization.
Yeah.
But as there's no competition, banks get to subsidize transactional banking from loans and overdraft fees and.
But when
currency
I mean,
exchange.
there's a lot of growth ahead. Obviously, you've got a potential to grow that business a lot. But when people invest in you at a valuation like we're talking about, they often think, well, what is the sort of bigger opportunity here? I mean, do you think personally, is it a sort of IPO route? Is it adding products and broadening that business? Is it selling to a bank of some sort or a consortium of banks to add that service? I mean, how do you see that panning out?
I see that panning out as there's still a huge amount of work to be done where we're at, and what we're doing is, so I love this thing that about 15 years ago, I think the founders of MySQL, there's a database system called MySQL, at least used to be quite popular. It was the first freeware database system after Oracle and IBM, and the founder said, someone asking like, what's your business plan? Said, databases, it's a $10 billion business. I'm going to make it a $2 million business. I'm going to keep one of the 2 billion. That's what they said about databases. I think a little bit is here as well. Like, what we're doing is we're just kind of removing the profits from foreign exchange. So we're kind of making this market smaller, considerably smaller, but there's value in what we're doing, and there's quite a lot of that. So that's partly what our investors are seeing, that they're seeing that we're solving a real problem.
And are you under pressure at this point in your life? You're still making losses as you expand. Are you under pressure to take that into profitability, or are people still happy to let you ride at a loss?
So it's a good. I think financials, as you're thinking of starting your own businesses, about financials as well. I think it's gotten much better during the last year or so. It used to be whenever people started a new product or a business, thought that they have to give the product away for free. Like, why would anyone use the product? Of course, it has to be free in the beginning, and they think that they can charge later. I think that's gotten much better now. I do think that, especially in a transactional product like us, you should have kind of financials really properly designed. And we started charging money from day one. So the first transaction we did, we charged €1.
But just going back to the point, I mean, are you under pressure to make money? No.
No.
So they're happy to keep going. A lot of people are interested in, are you having conversations with banks other than for licenses? A lot of interest in that question.
We even have a banking team. That's very fun. I think we're the only startup who has a banking team. There's about 6 people whose only job in their life, in TrasferWise, is talking to banks and finding ways how we can buy their services. So we're a buyer, we're the client to many banks.
But is your cooperation getting stronger with individual banks? Are you talking to them in terms of, rather than being a direct competitor, perhaps cooperating more and building those relationships?
Yeah. Definitely, as we go along, I think that's, like, time makes many things better in startups. The longer you go, the more our partners see what we're doing. We're more predictable. They know that, okay, it's going to grow something like this. The guys know what they're doing. They keep their words. And it's good to talk to them. They bring us revenue. So in that way, these relationships are always getting better and better and better. So yes, we do work with banks. We're big buyers of their services because they are the infrastructure, and that's getting better.
Okay, because there's a related question, which is more of a practical one, which is, what practical advice would you give to aspiring fintech entrepreneurs that need to partner with banks, and how do these deals work? Obviously, that's a pretty important question right now, because a lot of the banks themselves have launched their fintech funds and their fintech incubators, and they're trying to actually sort of reinvent their own infrastructure and their own services. So how would you think about that if you were starting this today, how you interacted with the banks, whether you tried to partner with somebody, whether you tried to go it alone?
That's also with a caveat, because when I started, it was done differently. There was no way you could even talk to anyone at a bank before them just blanking out in your first 2 sentences. It's much better now, definitely much better now. But I would still be very clear what do I have to gain from the bank, and I would try to challenge whether my product needs a bank, or can it be done alone, or can it be done independently? So independence is super valuable. Whenever you start a startup, there's a huge premium for being independent.
And presumably your negotiating position with the bank gets better if you've got something to offer.
Exactly.
Rather than just an idea or you as an individual.
And as for most startups or founders, it's negotiating this phase where you're nobody, and you know that in the future, you're a useful partner for the bank or for whoever the bigger institution is. Then how do you get through that? And
do you think with banks obviously taking much more interest, and banks under huge pressure themselves, both from regulation, low profitability, all the things that they're struggling with, zero interest rates, they're obviously pressing in to reinvent their own models and spending a lot of time and money on this. Is that making it much harder for entrepreneurs, or is it throwing up more opportunities as they try and deal with all of the change in their own industry? That's good. I think it makes it better. I think it definitely there's definitely more things available.
As long as entrepreneurs are clear that also working with bank is going to slow them down. Banks are getting better as well, but still working with a partner or relying on some of their APIs that don't exist, it's going to slow you down. It's quite interesting they say banks are under pressure. It's interesting if that pressure actually becomes real. Like once that becomes real, does that mean that banks become unsustainable, even from the lending perspective? So,
I think a lot of people say it has become real. I mean, if you work at Deutsche Bank or somewhere, there have been a lot of cuts, and it is a reality that has changed dramatically.
Probably. I mean, their lifestyle the lifestyle at the bank has definitely changed. But the question is, how much of their tech and process needs to be fully replaced for them to be able to function. I think we're still 4 years away from knowing that.
I'm going to go back to this in 1 second, but just how different is the sort of fintech world in London versus New York? Are there big differences in what people are doing, the approach people are taking, or are they just very sort of similar environments but just different sides of the Atlantic?
They are slightly different. Actually, it's very interesting, and again, I like to bring this up, that there are a couple of great finance startups that have sprung up in Europe. There's Klarna, there's Adyen, there's TransferWise, and I think it does say something that the US financial infrastructure and the way that the banks work hasn't helped that much to start businesses. So otherwise, it's very weird that all the other big
vibrant in London still. What's your sense of where the ideas and the energy and the money is flowing at the moment?
There's some really clever trading related things done in New York.
Yeah.
So I think anything related to trading is more in New York. IEX is the kind of the new exchange for stocks and commodities. But things about payments, I would say Europe is quite strong at. So I think it's quite on par. Just the challenges are slightly different in both both areas. I think here it's I think the kind of the regulatory space is much cleaner.
Right. So easier in that way. Okay, just going back to this. So a lot of people, this is an interesting question, I'm interested in your thoughts. What is your biggest failure and what did you learn? Probably you've been asked that before, so hopefully you have some thoughts on that.
Oh, these are very hard questions, and we've had. I probably don't know what my biggest failure has been yet. I think that I'm still yet to find out what was the biggest failure.
But have you had any moments? I mean, right now it sounds like a very smooth journey from idea to billion-dollar startup. Were there no moments in here where things went wrong, where you were losing sleep at night because you didn't think it was going to happen or whatever? Can you just give us a sense of, I think most people would agree when you're setting something up, there are going to be moments where you have to show your mettle and push through and make it happen. Did you have none of those as you went through?
Of course, there are really, really hard things that you need to go through. I guess building the team is generally, I would say probably for the first, it's getting much easier for me because there are now so many other people who build a team. But for the first 4 years, say probably 30% of my time went into interviewing people and onboarding them. Going from 0 to 600 is a massive journey.
So what have you learned about hiring? Hiring is such a key, obviously talent is your whole business, making it work. What have you learned doing that so quickly in so many different countries? What are the lessons you would just give people of, how you think about hiring? What are the things you should look for in people when you're doing it that quickly?
So for founders, I think the best advice is to keep hiring. So I was interviewing everyone coming into TransferWise until we were about 160.
Yep.
I'm still interviewing there are a couple of engineers I haven't interviewed, but every engineer and product person still I try to interview. And it's been super helpful, not for them so much, but for me, to get to know who the people who we're bringing on board. So even once you're scaling, it's definitely worth keeping interviewing.
But have you been going out to find talent? Have you been just sort of fielding people coming to you? How have you got that team in place that has worked well? Just give us a sense of how you actually do that.
It's been very hard. So our VP engineering, I hired for 18 months. I was interviewing candidates for 18 months, and they're great people. We couldn't get a click. Team would see how much value they would bring into them until we found Harsh, came from PayPal. He's done amazingly. And when he came on, for the first 2 months, he coded. And he has a team of 60 engineers to kind of look after. But for the first 2 months, he went into teams, he coded, and he's doing really well.
Okay. A lot of people are interested in this question. I'm looking for an idea. Do you have any suggestions? Now, obviously that suggests that you've still got a bit of work to do, which is good. But we were talking about this earlier, actually, because you picked a part of the financial system where there was this very clear, decent profit margin that was happening from a fairly simple transaction. Are there other areas when you look around the industry that are sort of obviously ripe for that sort of opportunity?
There are. Some of them are quite hard.
Anyone you want to share?
Totally. So have a look at my blog. A few months back, I wrote something, 3 ideas I'd love to back if someone went to do them. But they're really, really hard, as things like interchange and the cost of card payments. Things arising from the issue that our money lives in banks. But maybe the more useful thing that I could say here is that when you're evaluating your ideas, the one thing that I have learned over the time is that, and just watching our journey and other people who maybe started at the same time than us and maybe didn't get as far, that when you build a product, convenience is incredibly important. It's super important that you have a user interface. It builds trust. People like to use nice-looking things, and that they would be convenient. But you can't sell on convenience. So if you're building a new product, it's very hard to bring something to market that does exactly what the previous thing did, but just it's a bit more convenient. So if we look at why people start using TransferWise, mostly it's about cost. Mostly it's people have realized that it's too expensive to use a bank. Sometimes it's about speed. We're now moving money in seconds between bank accounts. But these are hard metrics that people care about enough to move. usually, especially in financial services, the barrier is very high for moving to trying out a new product. So convenience is not enough. It just helps, but just doing another wallet or another app that is better and more convenient isn't enough for a new business.
Okay. A question for me in terms of the type of customers that you're going after. I mean, I think it started off with people like you who had a bit of money and were willing to experiment with this app. There's obviously vast numbers of people around the world who are migrant workers sending money back in remittances to their home country in different ways. Is that a market that you're actively really trying to get into, that sort of smaller transaction, probably less sophisticated market? And how does that work in terms of people sending money back to Mexico, the Philippines, Africa, whatever it is? Is that a big part of your business? Is it something that you want to take further? Is it something that you feel from a sort of social perspective is important? Can you give us a sense of how that plays into your thinking?
So from the social perspective, it's definitely important. From the practical perspective, as a founder, you'll find that it works kind of two ways. You have to put something up and see how people like to use it and who starts using it, and then you have to learn from this and then you amplify. Yeah. So most of our growth has come from this one blog post that went up, and then you started talking to people and see why do they use it, and then you start amplifying these motions with maybe a bit of marketing and opening up routes. So for example, the way that we decide which currency route we open up, we have a currency wish list. So people who come onto the site, they try to send a currency that doesn't exist. It goes into the wish list. So this banking team that I was talking about earlier, they look at where the
next
countries.
If a certain number of people do it, you think it's a good idea.
Exactly.
Okay.
And we sometimes it's a country in Africa, sometimes it's Croatia. Right. So it depends on what the people want.
So it's almost up to someone to build their own community of people who want to do it, and you'll offer the service. Okay, exactly. I'm going to keep taking some questions from here, but if there's anyone in the audience who wants to put their hand up and ask a question in person, we have some microphones, and it would be great to get some interaction from here. There's somebody by the bar having a drink. Can we get a microphone over there? Is that possible? Or will you shout, please? There you go. Any competitors you are or were worried about?
We tend not to think about too much about competition, and to be fair, so you have to remember that we started solving a problem. So if there's someone who would be who can help solve that problem, like we would do half the problem, they would do half the problem, that'd be awesome. So in that sense, I'm actually a little bit disappointed that we haven't had a lot of new players trying to do the same thing. We're still, I think I've heard of one other who has kind of gotten rid of margins on the exchange rate, so gotten rid of hidden fees. But even the little startups that start, they try the traditional banking model, which is a bit sad.
There was a question at the front, right here. Oh, you already given someone the microphone. Okay.
Hi.
There you go.
Yeah. So TransferWise has sort of phenomenal rates of growth through word-of-mouth marketing. To what extent do you allow that means of marketing to affect the product that you offer?
How do we allow that means of marketing affect the product that we offer?
Sorry, yes. So does the way that you market the product affect how the product is developed in itself?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Of course, once we figured out that it's the way that TransferWise reaches new people is people telling their friends and their colleagues. Of course, we started adapting to this. We started a referral program, so basically incentivizing the same thing from happening. The way that we write our emails to customers, we write in a way that they're easy to forward to someone. Of course, we keep that in mind when we develop the product, and It's been super helpful kind of figuring this out.
And how much does that drive the business? People, things like forwarding emails and this sort of thing. I mean, is that can you see the impact when you tweak that email a little bit of just uplifts and that feeding through the system?
Absolutely. We have a team. So we talked about the banking team. I think the other team that not many startups have, we have a virality team. So all they do is, they're engineers. All they do is exactly this. So they tweak the product such that it would generate more virality. It would be either easier to share or easier to talk about. So virality coefficient is basically the thing that we monitor.
Okay. There was a question here at the front. You've already got a microphone, so you ask the question, then if you could...
Could you talk about operating in countries that either don't have a robust regulatory environment or even have high levels of corruption, and how that positively or negatively impacts your business? One example would be Cameroon, for example.
This is a very good question. So how do we operate in places where there's no regulatory environment? And the short answer is that we really don't. We have a choice. We have a choice where we go next. Yeah. And the choice is very kind of clear. How many people ask for it? How easy it is? How many people have bank accounts there, and so on. So there's a couple of factors, and if regulation is difficult or it's unclear, it's just if regulation is clear, it's usually easy, and we would do it. If the regulation is unclear, then we just don't. I mean, that's why in the country of Ukraine, we're thinking that we have a team in Ukraine anyway. Why don't we? It would be cool to launch payments from Ukraine. And we tried to figure out what the regulation says. We just couldn't even figure it out. So we went to the next country.
So,
yes.
And it looks like some of you have realized that standing up and asking your question gets you off Slido. So well done. That's good thinking.
Yes, I have a very simple question. How much time it took you from the idea to the product that other people can use to the moment when you're understood that you can stop your day job and dedicate full time to the product?
That's a good question. So the idea is an old idea, right? Since I think it was about 12, for me it took about 9 months, and it was too long. It should have been faster. So 9 months from deciding that this is something I want to try and build. And then I think about 9 months, actually no, 6 months, putting it in front of my friend and saying, trying to use it. And then I had to delete all the code and start over again. So it took another 3 months to get a product that could actually be used. It's about 9 months to get it usable, then another 3 months to actually put it public with this TechCrunch post. And that was it, basically. And that was quite an immediate success, so I didn't quite need my day job anymore.
So this TechCrunch post was actually a real lesson that you should always talk to the media as
exactly.
Key to your
media is the key to success.
There was a question at the back there. Away. Is that possible? Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Rinki Rati. I'm from JP Morgan. So I have a two-part question. They're completely separate. The first one is, what kind of market testing did you do initially when you came up with the idea to test it? And secondly is, when you actually started with it and it got successful, what was the reaction of financial institutions and regulators? And did you get any offers from other financial institutions, to collaborate with you or adopt your innovative business model?
So the first question, how did I use the test? I just went to my friends. As I said, the first reaction was pretty terrifying. I had to delete the whole site and start over again. But it was also very, very good feedback. Very good feedback, and one of the first ideas I got from my friend was exactly the understanding that it's not for me to change the exchange rate. I think the very first prototype that I did was actually, again, along the traditional model, it's just the spread was smaller. It was like 0.5% spread, but it was still in the exchange rate. So my friend asked, where does the exchange rate come from? I said, yeah, I made it up. I took the real exchange rate and put something on it. So he looks at me and says, no, you shouldn't do that. So I listened to him. I started using the real mid-market exchange rate that you see in Reuters. You have something to compare with. I was public about the fees that we charge. So these were the kind of learnings that we got. And to your second question, Ricky, the reaction from banks hasn't been, I would say, which is fine. I think they have lots of different problems to solve, and that's totally fine. I don't think foreign exchange or payments is very high on their list in this climate. Especially, remember, we started in 2011, so it's quite the height of the problems. And the other way to look at the reaction from the banks, again, when I was doing the customer service in the first couple of years, I noticed that a lot of the email addresses of our early customers were Société Générale, BNP, and other banks who...
So they weren't using their own services.
Exactly.
Interesting. So a lot of people interested in Bitcoin. This is a big topic, but just very quickly, what do you think of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general? And do you ever see them as exchange or make transactions?
That is indeed a big topic, and we've been talking about this for 3-4 years now. Blockchain is a I think it goes phase by phase. So Bitcoin in itself is an awesome experiment. I think by now it's quite hard to see that Bitcoin as a currency would get mainstream traction. I think blockchain has always been very interesting as a technology. There are many awesome ideas of what you could use blockchain for to make trustless systems or systems that don't need trust with each other. There are now smart contracts, which is basically Turing machines on blockchain. So this evolution keeps going, and I am very sure that it's going to end up somewhere, this evolution, that is a mainstream use case. I'm afraid we're just not there yet.
Okay, I'm just going to ask the final question from Slido, because I think we're probably done in the floor here, which is a slightly lighter-hearted one, but it's about Richard Branson, and how did you get him to invest in you? Did he fly you to Necker Island and show you around? Or did you go to a basement in Slough? How did it work?
Apparently you still have to pay if you go to Necker Island. You have to pay your own flights. So with Richard Branson, he likes the kind of stuff that we do. In the past he liked to stick it to the man a little bit. He's talked with him in the early, and at the time he was interested in the ideas, interested in the approach, but it didn't quite. We were just too small. And then in the next iteration, we went back, and he said, "Yeah, I'll join the round." So he's been awesome. And
is he helpful? Has he actually been involved, or did he just sign a piece of paper and?
He's been involved a little bit, and we've looked at his other businesses as well. Like what could we work together and help his other businesses as well, and but of course our customers love it. It's a great sign that someone like Sir Richard has supported us.
Good. Oh, very insistent. Okay, we can do quickly one more. That was a very insistent hand in the air. Apologize, we've got one more.
So how did you build the initial prototype? What kind of tech did you use? Did you ask other people for help?
That's a very good question. So remember, it's a confession time, right? So it's 2010 when this happened. And I hadn't been coding for a very long time. I basically coded in university and then didn't code much in the next 10 years. And we recently went on a paintballing trip with our engineering team. So there's 40 engineers, and I was invited along, right? Engineers go paintballing, and I go along. And then I found out later why I was invited. I was invited because of the framework I chose, where the first site was built. And they just wanted to shoot at me.
Well, that's fair enough.
It was actually, I'm just exaggerating a little bit. It's called Grails. It's a Java-based framework that makes early prototyping faster, and it was a big thing in 2010. There are other ones now.
Kristo, thank you very much indeed. That's fascinating. Thank you for all joining us online. And Kristo will be here to have drinks and chat to people, I hope, for a little while afterwards. So thank you very much indeed. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, guys, thank you so much. Please join me in welcoming